Welcome to the Lights Coalition's slideshow on the impact of voucher funding on local school district budgets. We'd like to start this slideshow off with this quiz. I suggest you pause your computer now and take a look and try to answer the 4 questions. Press play when you're ready. If you're giving this to a presentation to a large group, you might ask for group responses to determine the answers of these 4 problems, like raising your hand who thinks number 1 is false or something. The answer to all 4 of these is false. Number 1, you'll see in the slideshow there's a wide range of per pupil funding. 2, it's false and it's required to fund, the Ohio legislature is required to fund public schools. 3 is false, but only Ed Choice expansion vouchers based on income can be used by all students in Ohio. Well, they have to have the income-based eligibility. Traditional Ed Choice vouchers are based only on labels given to your school. And the last one, number 4, is false, because in this presentation, we will make the argument that local budgets are impacted sometimes heavily. Vouchers are scholarships to private schools paid with public funds. There are many issues surrounding school vouchers, but the focus for this presentation will be on how school vouchers are funded in Ohio and the impact this has on funds available to public school students. Because local communities and the state share responsibility for funding public education, community members need to understand how this state-promoted privatization program is affecting public education funds in each district. The short answer is it varies widely. It is causing serious damage in hard-hit districts, and it is growing exponentially. Vouchers are making it harder for communities to adequately fund their schools. I suggest you pause and read the slide for a second. The Ohio Supreme Court has ruled 4 times, starting in the 1990s, that Ohio's school funding system is unconstitutional because it does not provide adequate resources to local school systems, and it does not effectively close the gap in opportunity from one district to the next. At this time, the state pays for about 48% of the cost of public schools across the state. The rest is on the shoulders of local communities. While the Ohio Constitution requires that public funds be used to fund a system of common schools, public schools, funding private education is not required. It is a relatively new expense that puts more pressure on scarce public funds. The legislature has been willing to spend money on vouchers, but it has not been willing to solve the crucial problem: inadequate and unequal funding of local districts. Vouchers undermine the capacity of the state and local communities to fund their schools. Pause, read the slide. Our common concern is narrow: the effect of vouchers on local school district budgets. To start, we need a quick review of how districts are funded in Ohio. Schools are funded by a combination of state aid that is allocated from the general fund and local funds raised through property taxes, school levies. The traditional approach has been for the legislature to define an amount that provides a basic foundation that local districts build on with local funds. While it attempts to cover a basic cost, it really represents this amount of money the legislature is willing to spend. It does not even cover many of the state mandated expenses, such as transportation and many ancillary services. Pause to read the slide. The state sets a basic funding level for all districts, currently $6,020. Both funds raised locally and funds appropriated in the state budget are used to provide the foundation amount. The state contribution is determined by the formula, which attempts to equalize education opportunities, depending on the capacity of local communities to fund their schools. Their capacity is measured by the value of their local property. Higher wealth districts receive less state aid, while those where the tax base is limited may receive more. Aid is calculated on a per pupil basis. Some additional resources are added for each student who may have higher cost needs, such as special education, English language learners, or poverty. State per pupil aid can range between a low of $550 and a high of more than $9,600 per student once all the additions are included. These are averages. The total amount of state funding for a district is the per pupil amount times the number of students receiving state support in that district. This includes public school students, voucher students, charter students, and those using an inter-district transfer. Do you know the per pupil aid for your district? An important note, state aid is not based on the income level of students, but the property wealth of the community. There are 9 high wealth and high poverty districts in Ohio. This combination can result in an underfunding related to need. For information about your district funding, ask your local school treasurer or visit the ODE website. There is a coalition chart, the chart from the coalition white paper that's on our website, chuh.net, that lists the amount for the hardest hit districts. And we'll be posting more information on our website as well. As you can see, as these samples of some districts in Cuyahoga County, there's a wide range of per pupil funding in Cuyahoga County, from a high of $3,487 per student to a low of $592. Let's focus on the voucher programs in Ohio. The numbers in this slide represent the cost of each type of voucher. It is set by the legislature and guaranteed to each student who uses a voucher. Ed Choice has 2 parts, expansion and traditional. They cost the same, $4,650 or $6,000 depending on grade level. Ed Choice expansion is available to students across the state based on income, now set at 200% of poverty. Traditional Ed Choice is available to any student who lives in the attendance area of a public school that the state defines as low performing. This is based on test scores. The other 2 programs are directed to special education students. They are available statewide, and the funding level is based on their diagnosis. As you can see, they can be very expensive. Some basics. Ed Choice expansion vouchers are direct funded by the state. They are a line item in the budget. They do not require a cash transfer from the local school district funds. Traditional Ed Choice, Autism, and Peterson are funded by the deduction method. This means the state contributes aid to the local district for the voucher student, the same amount as a public school student in that district would receive, and then the district pays the full cost of the voucher. When state aid is less than the cost of the voucher, the public school students underwrite the difference. We're going to see that in a second. Private and religious schools must agree to accept the voucher students, and a voucher student must be admitted by a private school to receive a voucher. The Ohio Department of Education awards vouchers. Parents apply for their children and are entitled to reapply and use a voucher until high school graduation. To be eligible, a student must first attend a public school for 1 year, unless they move in from out of state, are entering kindergarten, or are in high school. The high school requirement was dropped in the last minute in the 2019 budget. Pause to read. Here's the problem. The state creates a fixed cost for a voucher, but it does not pay the full cost. It only provides the amount that it would give to a public school student. As stated earlier, that amount can be anywhere between $550 and $9,600. If you live in a district with a small amount of aid per pupil, you will only receive a small amount of aid for from the state for each voucher student that lives in the district. The rest comes from local coffers. Per pupil aid in most districts is substantially less than the cost of each voucher. That money has to come from somewhere. It comes out of local school district resources. Voucher students are guaranteed the full cost of a voucher, but public school students are not guaranteed the full benefit of their allocation of state aid. Please take a look at this slide, where it has examples from 3 different districts. Let's look at the math of voucher funding. In this case, we will only look at the cheapest vouchers, Ed Choice for elementary school students. It will demonstrate the problem. We're comparing 3 school districts. All are high poverty, but receive less per pupil aid than the cost of a voucher. The first row of numbers is the per pupil aid that the state sends to each of the 3 districts for every child, voucher or public school student who lives in the district. Remember, some districts receive less and some more. The second row is the cost of the voucher that must be funded by the district. It is the same regardless of the district's per pupil aid. The last row is the part of the voucher that the district must pay, the cost to the community. It is the gap between what the state contributed and the actual cost of the voucher. This is expressed as a negative because that is the local cost and it comes out of the local budget. It is the money the district would have had no one used the voucher. You can see all 3 districts had to dig into local funds to pay for vouchers, but they amount very significantly. If only a few students use a voucher, the cost to a district will be minimal, and it is likely to be able to absorb the loss. But when many students use a voucher, the loss can create a significant funding shortfall. Voucher use is not uniform across the state, so some can be much harder hit than others, creating more funding inequality. The deduction method creates a lot of financial problems. The state funds meant for public school students do not reach those students. It shrinks local budgets. Using local funds to pay for students who do not attend the school shortchanges those who do. School districts are forced to ask voters to fill the hole by increasing property tax. Vouchers make it hard to budget because voucher use is unpredictable. And lastly, voucher expenses increase funding inequality. What happened in the hardest hit districts in 2019? So how much did school districts lose? In the 18 of the Ohio's 612 districts, voucher costs were so high that more than 10% of the state aid appropriate for public school students didn't reach them. Funds for public school students were reduced between $150,000 in Kirtland and $4.3 million in Cleveland Heights, University Heights because of vouchers. We learned that in 2019, the hardest hit districts lost more than 10% of their state aid because they had to close the gap between the state contribution and the total cost of the voucher. The increased burden on local taxpayers was enormous. 18 districts fell into this category and 11 of them are in Cuyahoga County. No district can simply swallow that kind of loss. It's a serious threat to education quality. In this slide, it's a dramatic representation of the effects of deduction funding on local school funding in one school district, Cleveland Heights, University Heights, in Northeast Ohio. The top left is the amount of state aid that was allocated in 2018-19 for CHUH, $21.3 million, which came to an average of $3,239 per student for 6,727 students. Follow the arrows to see how each kind of voucher shrink local funds. You can see that charter schools are funded the same way as is open enrollment. That is when a student from one district attends a public school in another. Whenever the cost exceeds the per pupil aid for students not educated in the district, it comes out of funds for students in the district it does educate. CHUH started with $21.3 million and ended up with $10.6 million. So we can see that there were 883 EdChoice vouchers costing $4.2 million, 249 special ed vouchers, with an average of $12,760 for another $3.1 million loss. Charter schools, there was a loss of $2.5 million. 149 were interdistrict transfers for a little less than $1 million. So the net result is that for the 5,111 students attending the CHUH schools, their per pupil funding ended up being $2,074 per student. We've also calculated that if CHUH had not had any of these programs, it would have had $16.6 million instead of $10.6 million. When state aid for a voucher is insufficient to cover the full cost, local districts must pay the difference. This makes the school funding system unfair. Public school children are shortchanged. Public school districts can't budget in a reliable way. Inequality increases and local taxpayers pay more. But wait, things get worse. The formula is supposed to create a fair system for distributing state aid based on, in part, on enrollment numbers. But the state budget for the next 2 years is frozen at the 2019 level. When there is any increase in voucher use or enrollment, there will be no additional money. The frozen budget impact. Unless the state legislature fixes it, the full cost of every new voucher awarded during this biennium will come out of local funds. Remember, most new vouchers now go to students who have never attended a public school. In the Cleveland Heights University Heights District, there were 600 new vouchers awarded this past school year, and only 25 of them ever were students who attended the public schools before using the voucher. 25 out of 600. The legislature justified using public funds for private schools so children could escape failing schools. That is not who is using the vouchers. Public school families are not fleeing their public schools. They're generally satisfied with their local public services. Freezing a budget while encouraging voucher growth is like a family of 4 suddenly being required to feed 3 additional people every day who eat at a fancy restaurant. You can see from this slide that the number of schools defined as Ed Choice just grew exponentially. It is not because education quality suddenly plummeted. Lawmakers changed the rules. This is a manufactured crisis by the state of Ohio to divert public investment in our common schools. With this kind of growth in labeling schools, the state is demonstrating its preference for private education over its responsibility to educate the children attending public schools. In the same time period, there were 39 school districts with at least one Ed Choice school in 2018-19. The next year, next year, there will be over 400 districts out of 612 in the state with at least one school labeled Ed Choice. The legislature keeps changing the rules so that more schools will be identified as failing. Voucher students get their guaranteed money first. Here's a student that got $25,000 voucher. Here's one that got a $6,000 voucher, or $4,650. But the student over here, the one on the right side, this is our public school student. So this is why I'm left with only $2,000 to go to my public school. Public schools are at the end of the line when it comes to prioritizing the use of public funds. Because of vouchers and other publicly funded options for leaving the public schools, the full amount of money allocated by the state for each public school student does not benefit them. It benefits students not educated in our public schools. What should the legislature do? It should reimburse, it should fund all vouchers directly from the state budget. That would be the best choice. Reimburse unfairly burdened districts for the unfunded cost of vouchers and prioritize high poverty districts. Also, it could cap the amount of funding a district can lose to vouchers. A long-term solution is needed to make sure that public school students are not properly served. In the short term, the legislature can minimize the negative effects of its policy. Here are at least 3 choices that would make that happen. Be informed, spread the word, be a change agent. Share this presentation with another group. Demand that your elected officials correct these injustices. And endorse the Heights Coalition for Public Education position on high-stake testing and privatization. We can make a difference if we stick together and have a common call to arms. Help us advocate for public education. Endorse the coalition's position statement and find this slideshow and other resources on our website, chuh.net coalition. There's also a 2-page handout that goes with this presentation that would be very helpful in summarizing some of the finer points of the presentation. Hope that this has been helpful. Good luck.